Welcome to the Wounded Leadership Podcast, Stories from the Wounded. I'm your host, Dr. Matthew Tanner, the founder of Wounded Leadership Ministries. You know, the calling to shepherd God's church brings some of life's greatest joys and adventures. Yet this calling also comes with profound challenges. Many church leaders face those challenges in silence. Nearly every pastor will experience the pain of unjustified termination or forced resignation at least once in their ministry journey. On this podcast, we create a safe place where wounded leaders can share their stories, find community, and discover pathways toward healing and a renewed purpose. Each episode will bring honest conversations with those who have walked through the valley of ministerial suffering and emerged stronger on the other side. Whether you're currently serving in ministry, recovering from church trauma yourself, or simply want to better understand the challenges that are facing today's church leaders, this podcast is for you. It will offer biblical wisdom, practical strategies, and genuine hope. Now let's begin today's conversation. Welcome to Wounded Leadership Stories from the Wounded podcast. Guys, I am super excited about our guest today to spend time with us, the one, the only Matt Davis. When we were talking right before we started, I was going to come up with this really good laundry list of things that I could introduce you and make you sound as good as possible. But man, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself and we're going to dive straight into the conversation. So Matt, tell us who you are. What do you do? All the relevant things, man.
Yeah, my wife would say, good thing he's the one and only, because it sounds like I'm usually a lot to handle, but
Right. An acquired taste is what my wife says.
that's right. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man.
Good to be here. Good to connect with you and have benefited from our relationship and the work that you've done. I tell people that I'm a recovering pastor. I'm not sure how much longer I'll say that, but I was in ministry for more than a couple decades at a larger church in Southern California. I earned my way out of ministry, which doesn't mean that I did everything really well. And then they said, "You've done so well, now you get to leave." I had a moral failure. And
Wow.
in the process of that, really learned quite a bit in that season, obviously we're talking about wounded leaders and how do we get that? And sometimes those wounds come from somewhere else or someone else. And sometimes those are self-inflicted wounds, and then you have the ripple effects that really kind of come from all of that. There's the death and the second death and the third death, and like, oh, I didn't even see that fourth death coming. And so, walking through that season. So I'm a little bit of a mixture of, figuring out, well, what will you have me do now? Has all been lost? Is all hope gone? Can anything in my life be redeemed? And so the answer, by the way, is yes. And God is good.
Yeah.
I hope to really, and it might be an interesting conversation for us. Is it once a wounded leader, always a wounded leader, or is there a point where we heal? And I would say that I'm still healing and in process of all that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I multiple times over my ministry in birthing wounded leadership and even this podcast, I constantly ask myself this question: how do you know you're healed? And I really come down to the fact that I don't know when or where that's going to happen. I think it's healing pastors. So talk more about that dynamic, maybe kind of share whatever part of your story you feel comfortable doing, of just like, how do you know you're healed?
Yeah.
Or healing? Does it ever get to that finish line, if you will?
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. And I've likened different parts of you can be wounded in all kinds of different ways. But if you think about an actual physical wound, you could like drop a knife on your wrist accidentally and you'd be splurting blood all over the place, right? And that's obviously a wound that needs to be dressed. But there's different stages even in the healing process, right? Like, I can immediately put like a bandage over that and like immediately try to stop the bleeding. But once that happens, like maybe you have to go to the hospital and you have to get sewn up, right? And you get sewn up, and after you've been sewn up, then the wound starts to close, and even after the wound starts to close, like then there's a scar. I remember my father-in-law got in a massive motorcycle before I met him, and he spent years and years after the motorcycle crash that he was in physical therapy, just working out the scar tissue that was happening underneath. And so,
that stretching and stuff that has to happen.
Yeah, like I was in the house one time while he's getting one of these sessions, and like his therapist is kind of really grinding into that, like
Oof.
trying to break up that scar tissue, and that's painful. And so I think sometimes, there are varying, like, oh, I thought that was healed, and then like all
Mm,
of a sudden something comes back up, and like we might have range of motion, but maybe not fully for what it was, and you kind of push a certain part, and you try to get that
mm.
healing to loosen some of that up, and you realize like, man, there's still a little bit more that I need to keep going on.
Yeah, that's such a good analogy. Let's chase that. Chase that analogy for a pastor, been hurt by the ministry, either self-inflicted or, unjustified, whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
You've got all these wounds. Pastors do a really great job at hiding all of that. They do the home care, but then they don't go to the hospital. What does that look like for a pastor to go through that? You take that imagery of the scar tissue and stretching it out to regain that mobility. What does that look like for a pastor?
Yeah, it gets hard because when you're a pastor, you don't stop loving Jesus or becoming a Christian. I know that
Mhm.
certain people go through their journey and they might deconstruct and everything else. But if you are a believer, you love Jesus, just because you got fired or forced out doesn't mean that you stop loving Jesus, but re-entry into church, into a different community.
Hmm.
What does it look like for you to walk in through the doors and not be called pastor, right? Like there is a
Yeah.
healing that has to take place. What does it look like to, oh, I don't sit in the front row anymore. I'm going to hide here in the back.
What does that feel like for a pastor? I mean, I've been through it. I know you've been through it. What does that feel like?
Initially for me, the hard part was that as part of my restoration process, we were asked to stay at our church. And we had a Christian, like private Christian school attached to our church. And so I had 3 kids that were going there. And really, in order for our kids to continue to go for that school year, they asked us. And it was, I would say that it was with good intention of wanting restoration within that community. But when that comes 4 weeks after they just read your letter of sin and confession in front of thousands of people at the church, that becomes really difficult. Like that
Yeah,
space,
how do you walk in that door? I
not by
mean, with it,
yourself.
right? Well, yeah, that's one important point. You never go alone.
Yeah. And we really had to, at that point, I didn't know what was happening with our marriage. Neither did my wife. We were trying to, we were looking at our wounds and saying, what do we need? But we also like called a really, really small group of friends and said, would you meet us in the parking lot as the service is starting and form a Roman phalanx around us and help walk us in?
Mm.
Because we just needed to be insulated, right? And that story carried a lot of shame. For us, it was not walking into a new church where nobody knew us, though I would have preferred that by maybe 1,000. That part of walking in a couple minutes late and walking out a couple minutes early to avoid, right? Like
Avoid the questions, avoid the comment, and just
yeah.
all those things.
Yeah, but it's not even just walking back into the church service. Like I had trouble walking into Trader Joe's because, when you're in ministry, it's not just like, hey, I work, as a financial advisor down the road in some office building. You're recognized, your face is on a 20-foot screen and people know you. And so what does that look like? And what is that experience not only for me, but for them? They see you in a grocery store and they say, "Oh, hey, Pastor Matt. I mean, I'm Matt. What do I call you?" Right? And so that
Mm.
becomes really difficult. So you have those moments of, I think I'm healing. This is like the it's not bleeding anymore, and then you have something that like kind of
Just opens up the
it
wound
opens
again.
up. Yeah, that's hard. It's
Yeah,
hard.
I mean, because as pastors and those of us in ministry, we tend to find our whole identity in what we do, who we are.
Mm,
We are a pastor. Everything that we do kind of wraps up that identity, and then that's changes in a heartbeat. Talk about that struggle of finding a new identity, like walking through that.
yeah. Where to begin? I mean, I'd love to say, oh, it was easy for me.
It
I
was
had all of that
it
all
was
sorted out.
great. Yeah, it
I
was
mean,
great.
I did the messages on, we are his workmanship, and I knew I was fearfully made, and we did those Sundays. I did those messages, but when you come to the other side of that, to an experience like mine and like many people I've talked to since, you have trouble. You realize, my goodness, and really like a good paradigm for me, a framework for looking at it, was looking at kind of three areas of my life: identity, assignment, and calling.
Hmm.
And I would tell you, if you asked me a decade ago, tell me about yourself, I would say, well, I'm a pastor. And what I meant by that was both my identity and my calling. And that was how I operated. And it was a little harder for me to access the child of God thing, though I could preach on it. And I'd say now, on the other side of things, like I could tell you that uh, that me being a pastor was my assignment, and
Hmm.
that God gave me that assignment, and I've had to reform and get in touch again with my identity. But my wife wrote a very interesting article. She said it was called "Untangling the Fourth Strand," and she says, you know how when you get married, they say there's a cord of three strands, and when at the marriage ceremony, like there's the husband, the wife, and we're supposed to be interwoven with the spirit of God, and
Hmm.
that's this cord that can't be broken is the message that I've done at plenty of weddings I've officiated. But she said what you don't realize is when you get married to a pastor that there's this fourth strand that is also woven into that cord of three. And that fourth strand is the ministry strand that
Hmm.
is in there, and it's part of everything that you do. And it's in your marriage. Like you're not just a woman who's married to a pastor, but you are married to the ministry as
Hmm.
well. As much as I thought I was doing a good job of keeping that separate and all that. I just, I'd look back at that. There's a lot that I regret and wish I'd done differently. But she said,
Yeah.
untangling when that fourth strand of ministry was no longer part of me, taking it out and untangling it from everything else was messy, not just for me, but for our marriage, for how I was parenting. Like I was a mess for a good long time.
What did it take to untangle that?
Mm. I mean, that maybe it might be going back to like, well, are we ever not wounded? What does healing look like? I mean, I still walk into a church, and I was in church on Sunday, and
Hmm.
I'm listening to a message on the fruit of the spirit, and I'm thinking, well, he missed that, and that one's different, and oh, that was an opportunity to say something, and I fight that, man. I fight that real hard,
Yeah.
to not, and there's pride. I mean, there's so much pride wrapped up in that too. So I'm still, you're not talking to somebody who's completed the process. I'm 6 years out, 7 years out, and I'm still very much a work in progress. God's still working on me.
So how do you find hope in the midst of that? Because I think some people would read that is, if I'm 6 or 7 years out and I'm still in that untangling process, that seems I suffer from truthitis and lack of tactitis. I just say it like it is. I'm like, that sounds depressing, dude. So how do you find that?
For a long time, I had to borrow the faith of my wife. She was
Ooh.
far more faithful. I didn't have the faith that I was going to come out of it. And I love, how did you find hope? I told you just before we started here that I talked to a girl who teaches Hebrew,
Mm.
and this word for hope is tikva. And it's not a wishful thinking like, "Oh, I hope one day I'll have a nicer car," or something like that. That our hope in the English sense of things is it's wishful thinking.
Yeah. It's empty.
Yeah, but that's not biblical hope. This word tikva, it talks about our relationship with God, that God is our hope. And literally, I love this image that when Rahab lets the rope down to the spies in the
Mm.
book of Joshua, she's letting down a tikva, a hope for Israelis, for Hebrew speakers. Hope is a rope. It's something
Mm.
that you hold on to, and it's a assured thing. I'm looking at something knowing that it will come to pass, which, even in Israel, their national anthem is called Hatikva. It's the hope. And so when I start looking at my own situation of like, well, I hope one day this is going to resolve itself.
It's not wishful thinking.
Right. It's not wishful thinking that if I can actually get myself to the point of realizing like God is my hope on a rope, I got to hold on to him and nothing else that I held on to before. My identity, my friendships, my community, my calling. He is my only hope. That gives me hope.
Yeah, I love yeah, I'm gonna be marinating on that. We talked about it before, it kind of comes in now. And while you were saying that, I was, thinking as Rahab lowered the rope, lowered the basket, they had to get in the basket. And pastors are so bad
Mhm.
about getting everybody else in the basket and then going, "Okay, we're good." So what steps can a pastor do? I know it feels like I'm asking the same question a different way, but how do pastors like give themselves permission to grab that rope to get in the basket?
I think we have to get to a point of humility and saying, "I need help. I need
Mm,
help. I'm going to call on on the Lord, and He is our help." I mean, not that this is a Hebrew study, but that word in the Hebrew is ezer. It's He is God is known as our hope, but it also means strength, and He is an army, and it says it actually means that He encircles us. If I could actually get myself into that of knowing that He's got me no
mm.
matter what. It's not 3 steps to a better life. It's I gotta sit in this a little bit, and I've been there, and I'd say that, like, on the other side of things, like, it's been incredibly redemptive and God is good, but that's not easy. That's not a slogan or a bumper sticker that I look at on my mirror in the morning and, it's this SNL skit, "I'm good enough, smart enough," and
Doggone it, people love you.
right? So,
I think we
um
just dated ourselves.
yeah, yeah. Hopefully somebody out there. But I mean, that's I think that's essentially this is a process. It's a long journey in the wilderness with a God who is faithful, who walks
Mm.
above us.
I think one of the things that this phenomenon does for two pastors is it's very isolating. It's very embarrassing. You talked about that pride
Mm.
that came in. So did you have anybody that like kind of what's the word, interjected themselves, or God just pulled you into your circle? You talk about borrowing the faith of your wife. I absolutely love that phrase.
Mm.
Kind of camp out on that one. But how did God fight that tendency to isolate in your experience in your life?
I, I wanted to isolate. Like that was the thing that like it felt safer.
Mhm.
Because every person that you talk to became a mirror of how you doing. And sometimes I wanted to avoid that. I didn't want to be sought out, and you realize that, especially in a situation like mine, self-inflicted wound, the air gets sucked out of the community pretty quickly. I call it the Uriah effect, where David sends put Uriah on the front line, and when I count to three, everybody take a step back, and he's out there in the DMZ all by himself and
Mm,
looking around, and you're not only getting hit by enemy fire, but it feels like the friendly fire is just as painful, if not more. But in that, there's certain phrases, but there are friends for seasons, and there are friends for reasons, and there are friends for a lifetime.
mm,
And I think you find in those seasons who your friends for a lifetime are. And
mm,
so I was very thankful to have some good people who came around me and said, "I'm going to just love you right where you're at. You don't need to perform. I don't need you
mm.
to preach a good message. I'm just going to love this crappy version of yourself."
I'm always mindful of Job in this story, and we need friends not like the friends that Job had, who, because I'm sure you had those that gave the advice, the unsolicited, terrible advice. But did you have any friends that just sat in the ashes with you and just hurt with you?
Yeah. Yeah, we had a few people who would pray with me. Some of those people were already part of my community, and some of them were brought in or
Mm,
suggested. And they were people who would go into the well, right? They would come into the well with me, and we would sit there and we'd seek God. Thank God, because you get to one of those experiences and you just, I'm so thankful I came out on the other side still faithful, because I could see where,
mm,
all of that, like I just forget it all. Like the people of God, like this is just, there were very, very hurtful things in the process. And I saw the people of God not act like the people of God. And I felt that very acutely. And you feel the disappointment amidst my own disappointing people, right? Like I do not want to make myself out to be a victim here.
Mhm.
by any stretch. I certainly I accept my sinfulness and the wrongdoing and how that hurts so many people, my own family, my kids, all of that. And then the community outside of that, the disappointment and I hate that, that I get to sit with this.
Mm.
I was another statistic of the church, another one bites the dust and I see it and I still see it and it hurts and it's sickening. And I did that. And then somehow God can say, I can redeem you even from this. Right. And so there are moments if I sit back and I could go back through some of that, it's painful. It's uncomfortable to sit in that. But I also have seen like God wants to redeem. He's
Mm.
making all things new. And those pictures of resurrection are that much more sweet, right? We had a moment in our marriage where my wife thought we're as good as done and
Wow.
uh, had a vision. And we're not like vision people, but she had a
Yeah.
vision that Jesus showed up and it was the resurrected Jesus and said, "Do you believe that dead things can come back to life? Do you believe in the resurrection?" And she said, "I do." And he said, "Well, then I can raise your marriage up from the dead." And
Mm.
that is the picture, right? That is, we have a God who continues to do that over and over again. And it's one thing to believe it and to know it cognitively and theologically. It's another thing to experience it. And so I'm grateful for that piece.
This may be a tough question, but how did being wounded make you a better minister to people, a better pastor, a better leader?
Yeah.
Because we don't think of it in that context ever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can relate to sinners, right? I always could, but
Now you
the
really can.
the,
Yeah, it's
the truth is out, right? Like
right.
I can come alongside people. Here's where I found like my calling in this season of my life. And I'd say probably this is where the Lord has me, but it's wrapped up in this scene from, I'm going to date myself again here, but West Wing. There's a scene where it says, he says, there's a guy stuck in a dark, deep hole and he's yelling and screaming for help.
Mhm.
And all day long, people walk by the hole. They hear the man yelling and screaming for help, and they just keep walking. And one day, a guy comes and hears that man yelling and screaming and does the unthinkable, does what nobody else is willing to do. He jumps into the hole with the man.
Mm.
And the guy who's stuck in the hole says to the guy who just jumped in, "Well, what did you do that for? Now we're both stuck in the hole." And the guy who jumped in said, "I've been in this hole before and I know how to get out."
Wow.
And I realized like that my role is to be a hole jumper. I I have no problem getting down and dirty with people in their worst moments, right? Like
Mhm.
if there was a triage or an ER situation in the spiritual world, I'm not really like if it's an actual like car accident that happens in front of me, I will call 911, but I'm not going to pull over because if I see somebody bleeding or like their arm is twisted the other way, we're going to have two casualties. I'm not going to be able to help you, right? Like
It's like I'm out.
I now become a liability, and what's this other guy over here passed out for? Oh, he saw the blood, and he's no help, right?
Just
So,
move him out of the way.
right, but when it comes to something like this, I can
Mm.
jump into a hole, and I think that that's our calling. Is we have to show empathy. I've been here, and let's just sit in this for a little bit. But
Mm.
I don't want to keep somebody in the hole. We're not meant to be in holes. Let me show you the steps that I've taken in my life and where God has shown me some things. And
Mm.
here's a handhold here, or jump on my back here, or there's a rope here. Like let's do this and let's do this together.
How do you convince somebody to start climbing?
You can't.
Mm.
I don't think. I mean, I'm sure from experience that I've seen people circling the drain, right?
Mhm.
Like they're going down their own life and you want to warn them and say, "This is I know where this path leads." And I found myself as a pastor oftentimes doing more for people, trying to help them out of their own mess than they were willing to do for themselves. And there came a point in
Mm.
time where I had to say, "I'm willing to go as far as you're willing to go, but
Mm.
I can't do it for you." And that's painful and it's hard to watch, but I can be a non-anxious presence. I can show up and say, "When you're ready to move, I'll move." And in the meantime, let's sit. And so I don't think I can. I don't have that much power.
Mm.
And I'm not gonna, sometimes it's just gotta be a point where you've reached that place where you say, "I'm ready."
Mm.
I've been there.
How did you personally get unstuck?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think getting unstuck is not a moment. It's not I woke up one day and said, I'm no longer stuck. I think that it is a process of unsticking. And I don't have that really like fully thought out, but I think it's the Lord has been faithful in these little places. And maybe God is the greatest hole jumper there is. He's going to sit with us. In fact, um, one of these verses that was with me, it was Deuteronomy 32,
Mhm.
32:10. Here it is. Says he found him in a desert land and in the howling waste of the wilderness. So this is talking about God finding Israel
Mm,
in the wilderness experience. He found him in a desert land and in the howling waste of the wilderness. It says he encircled him, he cared for him, and he kept him as the apple of his eye. And I
mm,
love the words in the howling waste of the wilderness. It's the Yeshimon in the Hebrew. It's the unsurvivable scorched earth. Like the in the original language, it's the wilderness is there. There's a survivable wilderness. There's a
mhm.
wilderness that you can survive based on the hospitality of others, and then there's the wilderness that you can only survive because of God. And
Wow.
that is for 35 out of the 40 years that Israel wandered the wilderness. They were in the Yeshimon, yet they flourished. They
Wow.
were in the scorched earth, unsurvivable wilderness. And really, what it takes is that dependence on God. But I love what it says at the very end. It says, he kept him close, like the apple of his eye. And the funny thing is that there is no word apple ever mentioned in the Bible at all. Sorry, there's so much Hebrew here.
That's okay. I'm here for it. I'm here for this. This is good.
The word for apple in Hebrew is tepuach.
Uh-huh.
But that word in that verse is not tepuach. It's this word ishon. Ish is man, but ishon is little man. And what does that mean? That God kept Israel close, like the little man in his eye. And what it means is
Mm,
that in the wilderness season for Israel, God was so close. If like we could get eye to eye and get uncomfortably close for two men to stand next to each other, I would have to get so close that when I look into your eye, I could see my own reflection in it. And
mm.
God is saying, that's what I'm doing. I'm so close that I can actually see myself in your eyes, Israel. And so you realize, like, man, God wants to be close to us in the scorched earth seasons of our lives.
Well, that is so, so important because this type of phenomenon, whether it be, a forced error, unforced error, whatever the case may be, it is so isolating because you talked about earlier, we lose our community, we lose our spiritual community, we lose our support structure. And so the tendency for pastors, we isolate. We self-reflect too much, I think, sometimes of like, nobody's going to love me now. And
Right.
so we tend to turn ourselves away from it and to realize that right there in the deepest, darkest moment, God finds us, that God is a rescue. Why is it so hard for pastors to be rescued? To say, here I am. We're more like Elijah at the depression moment. I'm the only one left. Everybody's out to get me. But yet God feeds us. Why is it so hard for pastors to lean into that?
I always find I enjoy when I meet a secure pastor. I see a lot of insecure
Hmm.
people in the pulpit.
Well, that goes back to their identities in the wrong place.
Yeah. Like, I've got something to prove, or I have this piece of revelation that God has given me. And, there is something about, and I don't have an answer for it, but there's something about how the infrastructure of the church is set up. And, this place, this idea that we have to be all things to all people. And not every church is demanding that, but I think we've put that on ourselves more often than we should. But, your pastor has to be the golden tongued, like, the best orator and most insightful, but they have a great bedside manner,
Yeah.
and they can also, from a leadership perspective, lead an entire team incredibly well. And they're a great fundraiser, and the church has no financial problems. And they're a great business person. And maybe we weren't meant to do all of that. And I
We're
see too many times where that pressure implodes in more
mm.
ways than one. in a lot of the work that we end up doing.
Yeah, we're expected to be perfect, but yet we look in the mirror every day and we realize how imperfect we are.
Yeah, there's a gap, right, between who I know myself to be and who I'm expected to be, and I don't want that gap to be exposed. It's very, very scary.
You deal with a lot of leaders, ministry leaders in some of your ministry. How do we begin to close that gap, either on the pastor side or the church's side, or both? Or, I mean, I'm trying to think of the most impossible questions to throw at you.
You're doing well. It's hard.
Hey, thanks, man. How do we close that gap? How do we begin to chip away at it?
Well, we started this ministry 3 years ago called Ministry Transitions, where I didn't start it. I started it with somebody, my partner Bill Tom, and we just started showing up for people. He was a career coach, executive coach, Fortune 500 kind of guy up in the Silicon Valley for years. Helped people who were in transition, in flux in the corporate world, in the marketplace, and kept getting all of these ex-pastors coming to him, telling these stories of damage and hurt and pain. And he just kept saying, like, how can I help? Where do I send them? And couldn't find anything. And decided, like, I think I need to do something to help the church.
Mhm.
Church is really good at saying hello, and we're not as good at saying goodbye. So he talked to a friend of his. That friend of his happened to be the chairman of the elder board who was presiding at the church that I was pastoring at. And
Really?
said, you should talk to Matt. He's been through the ringer and lived to tell about it.
Wow.
So Bill called me and said, I have this idea, except I've never been a pastor. I just know things from the career side of things. And here's my
Mm,
experience. And I told him my story, and you gotta imagine, like, for the few years before that, trying to get jobs and how do I interview? How do I tell this part of my story? I was a pastor, but I'm not anymore. All of these things that I tried to sugarcoat or make look better in some of these interviews for these other positions in a nonprofit,
yeah.
that were basically saying, "Don't hire me. I'm some kind of liability." I got to tell my story in full to Bill. He wanted to know
Mm.
everything.
Why was that important?
For him or for
Or for you to be able to just be authentic? Like you said, you spent that period of time trying to hide it. Like, don't hire me. I know I'm hijacking my other question, but
Yeah.
why is telling your stories authentically so important?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just telling my story, but that my story would actually be used for the redemption of others, and in somehow in the mix of all of that,
Mm,
would be redeeming myself and instilling some of that hope. I think that there's a website platform, Squarespace, that says, "A website makes it real." Well, there's something about telling your story
yeah.
that makes it real, and to be able to sit with somebody who doesn't squirm and wince when you say the parts, even though you feel it inside. You feel the ugliness of the situation, and
Mhm.
Bill just took that in and said, like, yeah, I get it, like, I get it, like, and where my worst moment, isn't that what God does, like, from death to life, right? Like, that my worst moment could actually be used to help somebody in their worst moment. That's the gospel, is that we are loved as much in our failures as we are in our goodness. And we think that we have to be good to be loved. And we certainly see that on a human level, but that's not how that economy of God works.
Because we're stronger than David, we're stronger than Moses, we're stronger than Elijah. I mean, these guys were not the most perfect guys,
Hmm,
but the hero of the story is not these guys. It's the hero of the story is our savior.
hmm.
So as we kind of, man, there's so many different places I want to go. We're going to have to do a part two sometime, but as we kind of wrap it up, there's a pastor who's just, I mean, it's the event, I call it the phenomenon, the event, either the church has forced them out or they've done some, that failure that has forced them out. And they're sitting there and just, I mean, it just happened. From where you are now in the healing process, what do you say to them?
Uh, there's a phrase, uh, the legend is that that Solomon brought together his wise men. And he said, I want to give a king a gift in another kingdom. I'd like you guys to help me kind of come up with what that gift might be. And so the wise men go away, come back a couple days later, and they bring him a ring. And engraved on the ring is 4 words, and it's "This too shall pass." And the answer to the question was, what can make the sad man happy and the happy man sad is knowing that in your worst moment, this too shall pass. A lot of times when we're equipping some kind of ministry organization and they have to have a termination or say goodbye to somebody on their team of some kind for some reason, they get a letter from me that says, if you're getting this letter, you're entering into a season of transition and your organization loves and cares about you enough that we're going to get to walk with you in this season. My cell phone number's on that letter, and I tell them,
Wow.
you can call me in the next 5 minutes, or I'll call you in the next 48 hours. I'll give you some space. But more than once, I've had somebody in that situation that you describe who just lost it all seemingly. And they're calling me from the car in the parking lot of the church saying, I don't know what to tell my wife. And so I tell them, I know this feels heavy right now, but this moment will pass. It's not always going to feel like this. It's not always going to sting like this. There is hope, and that hope is a person. His name's Jesus.
It goes back to kind of where we started with that analogy.
Yeah.
What the word hope really means.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to redefine what does hope really mean. It's not this empty expectation. It's firm. It is a rescue.
Yeah.
I have so many more places I want to go, man. We're going to have to do this again.
Absolutely.
So Matt, tell us, how if there's a pastor listening to this and it's in that moment, how do they find ministry transitions? And if you want to take a minute, tell us about some of the other cool things that you do. I know you've got a couple other podcasts that I've been listening to. They're really great. And I have no problem at all telling people about that. So kind of tell us, how do we get a hold of ministry transitions and some of the other things you do?
Yeah, ministrytransitions.com. So that's easy. You can find a bunch of resources on there. My wife and I started a podcast. The podcast is called Life After Ministry because when I came out of ministry, vocational ministry, I said, I don't think there is any life after ministry. What am I going to do with a seminary degree and 22 years behind the pulpit? There is no life. And the Lord started to slowly open this idea up. And so my wife and I started to really start talking about, well, what does our life look like? Is there life after ministry? The answer is yes, by the way. Is there ministry after ministry? Absolutely. You don't have to do that from the church. And so what does that look like? So we get to talk to people who have come through it and live to tell about it. And we tell stories of hope. If your last day of vocational ministry is day 0 or the phenomenon or the event, what do you do on day 1 to start rebuilding your life? And so we get to walk that season through. If you're in a place where you are thinking about, like, I just need the parachute and I need to get out, we walk people through what does that succession planning or the exit look like in the areas of career and coaching and counseling. And we get to walk through that with people. And even a resource that I wrote because I wrote this for myself. It's what I wish I had coming out. And it's called a field journal. It's like 12 pages. It's not really long, but it's orienting yourself to the wilderness. And I love Walter Brueggemann wrote a book called Spirituality of the Psalms, where he talks about the Psalms tell the story of our lives in these different seasons of orientation, disorientation suddenly, which could be the wilderness or the dark night of the soul. And then what we long for when we're in the wilderness in disorientation is just take me back to orientation. Take me back to Egypt, right? Isn't it funny that they're in the wilderness and they're like, oh, that we could be in Egypt eating leeks and onions. I'm thinking life's got to be bad if you want to go back and eat onions. I'm not an onion guy.
In the South, I'd be like, if only we could have liver and onions again.
Yeah,
That would be
right, there you
great.
go. But what I love that Brueggemann says is he says you don't get to go back to orientation. You get to go into reorientation, and that's a new normal. And so, you go to ministrytransitions.com/wounded. Made a little link for you for your crew there, and you can download that, and that's just a resource to be able to walk through that season and some verses and some passages to come alongside. But the other things, like I had to make money coming up in ministry, and so I joined a guy named Donald Miller at Story Brand, and so I help brands and ministries tell their stories, which is amazing to be there on the inside with like ministries. Like I just helped Campus Crusade relaunch their website, which I never would have thought. Like that's a crazy thing.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, so being part of Kingdom Stories and
Yeah.
helping out with what those things look like. And then I started a nonprofit with my dad called The Jewish Road. And I'm a Messianic Jew,
Hmm.
or sometimes I say a messy Jew. But what a time in the world to be
Ooh,
Jewish,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So we help Christians understand and make sense of the roots of their faith. We help the Jewish community make sense of who is this Jewish Jesus, this Messiah, who not only is to come, but he has come. So that's a little bit of, I'm a little hard to nail down as far as what am I going to do today. I even have trouble keeping up with myself with that. But I'm here to be able to stand as a testament of the goodness of God, that he has shown up and he has been faithful. And I'm not perfect, and I'm not fully healed.
Yeah.
Lord's still doing the work, but every day I'd say strength is growing.
Man, I don't know of a better way to wrap up today than that word alone. So, Matt, thanks for being here with us, being vulnerable, sharing your parts of your story. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this one again. This is gonna be one that needs to marinate a little bit. So, I want to say as we close, if you're listening to this, we're gonna put some of these links to these resources when this episode launches out there. We're gonna put some of those links in the notes for you so you can find those things. Also, you can go to woundedleadership.com. I want to mention our online community, thepastorscompass.com. All that will be in the notes. But if you identify with this story, go to woundedleadership.com on the tab, tell me your story. We want to hear your story. It's a place to get that started because there is healing in telling your story. Thank you, man. You've helped me tremendously just in my ministry and just in my personal life. Love your podcast. Thank you for spending time with us today.
You bet. Thank you. And thanks for your community here.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Wounded Leadership Podcast, Stories from the Wounded. We hope today's conversation has given you valuable insight into how vulnerability and resilience work to shape truly authentic leadership. Remember, our wounds don't define us. Every scar tells a story of survival, and every setback creates an opportunity for extraordinary growth. If today's episode resonated with you, please visit us at woundedleadership.com, where you're going to find resources, community forums, opportunities to share your own leadership journey. I also invite you to subscribe, rate, review this podcast on your favorite platform. Your support helps us to reach more leaders who might be struggling in silence. Till next time, this is Dr. Matthew Tanner reminding you that your wounds can become your greatest source of wisdom, connection, and strength. It's the Wounded Leadership Podcast, transforming wounds into wisdom, one story at a time.